Okay, thank you everybody for joining today. You should see on the screen just the intro slide to the presentation I'm going to be using. I'm not going to be following this presentation very strictly, so we can go off it if people have questions as I get to certain things, but I want to first make sure that you can at least see the screen. Can anybody confirm that you can see the slide?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. So the things I want to talk about today, this is there's not a special occasion for this or anything. This is just a matter of there's a number of things going on with the State 911 program right now that I wanted to make sure that everybody was up to speed on. If people find this useful, I may do these maybe once a quarter or at least twice a year going forward, so that we can keep everyone up to date on what's happening with the program. But these are the topics I wanted to talk about today. We're not necessarily restricted to these topics. I do want to respect people's time, so if it looks like we're going to go over an hour, we might break it up into doing another session on another date. But I want to talk about the 911 governing body data collection survey that I recently sent out, State 911 surcharge implementation, information regarding applications for increasing concurrent sessions, 911 auditing provisions, updating information regarding the emergency telephone charge increases, the FCC's recent notice of proposed rulemaking regarding 911 fee diversion, and then if there are other topics that people would like to talk about and we still have time, we can do that. On the 911 governing body data collection, this stems partially from the surveys that we've been doing in conjunction with the 911 Resource Center for years now, where we've been doing annual surveys of the 911 authorities. But it also comes from the change in statute from last year's House Bill 20-1293, which added a provision in the statute that says that governing bodies, in this case, it's referring to 911 governing bodies or authority boards, shall comply with annual reporting requirements established by the Commission by rule in order to assist the Commission in meeting federal reporting requirements and data requests, and to gather information for inclusion in those the annual report to the legislature. So essentially what it's saying here is that the purpose of the data collection is to help the Commission respond to the annual report that we send to the FCC. The FCC every year does a report or requires a report from every state in conjunction with the Net 911 Act of 2008. And the National 911 Program Office also does a data collection every year. And we, in the past, have struggled to answer some of the questions and have had to just tell them we don't have access to that data. The FCC is starting to get a little more serious on requiring states to completely fill out those forms. So to get ahead of that, I put together a survey that's similar to how we've done it with the Resource Center in the past, but we're doing it separately from the Resource Center now. And making sure that that survey includes all of the data elements that I know will be part of that FCC data request. And I wanted to kind of go through that form right now. In order to do that, I need a volunteer. I want to make sure that I'm not sharing anyone's information if they're not comfortable with me sharing it. So is there a 911 authority on here that would not mind me using their profile to show what fields are in this and to talk about those fields?
Daryl, this is Carl.
Thank you, Carl. So let's see, Garfield. So everybody.
Will you mind blowing that? Sorry, will you blow that up just a little bit? It's pretty small on the share screen.
Sure. This isn't what you're going to be. I'm going to be going to the screen with the actual form here. And that's probably still too small, isn't it? Let me go ahead and make that bigger. How's that? Can you all read
Better.
that? Good. So this is what everybody should have gotten. They should have received a custom URL. This is very similar to what the Resource Center is still doing for the public safety answering points and what we used to do with the Resource Center, where everyone got their own URL that was pre-filled with all of their information. So you see when I open it up, it's already filled out for Garfield County. And all you have to do is go through and correct anything that's no longer current. And then if there's anything that's blank, we ask you to fill that out as well. And it looks like Carl's already gone through. Yes, he has, and filled all of this in. I'm going through here. So, one of the things we ask are what PSAPs are funded by your 911 authority. Most 911 authorities have one PSAP. It's a one-to-one relationship, but some of them have multiple PSAPs. So if you do, just make sure that what I've already put in that field for you is correct. Total number of concurrent sessions, that's every 911 line that you are purchasing from CenturyLink for all of your PSAPs combined. Total number of PSAP FTEs, so this is how many full-time equivalents you have at all of your 911 centers. Total FTEs funded with 911 funds. So some 911 authorities help pay for personnel costs at their PSAPs and some don't. If you do fund some personnel costs at your PSAPs, we're asking you to estimate how many FTEs you're paying for out of your 911 surcharge funds. We recognize that the majority of personnel costs for a lot of PSAPs are paid out of city or county general funds, and that's fine. But one of the questions the FCC always asks us is how many FTEs are being paid for out of 911 surcharge funds. So we like to try to answer that question for them. Asking about text to 911 capability, whether all of your PSAPs, some of your PSAPs, or none of your PSAPs are text to 911 capable. This is a question that we haven't been able to answer in the past because there is no one source that we can go to collect this information statewide. How many text to 911 calls are being taken by 911 centers that are text to 911 capable? So by asking this question, we're trying to get a baseline statewide as to how many text to 911 calls are being handled by all of Colorado's 911 centers. Total spent by all PSAPs. This is one that a couple of people have contacted me to let me know that it's difficult for them to answer. This is particularly difficult to answer if your 911 center is part of a much larger budget and doesn't have its own distinct budget. If that is the case for you, I would ask you to do your best to estimate it. But if you just can't, put that in the field that you have no way of estimating the total budget or total cost of providing 911 service from your PSAPs, and we will do some extrapolation to try to fill in those blanks. But I'm trying to get as accurate a number as possible because this is one of the things that the FCC asks every year. I know that the full cost of providing 911 service doesn't even come close to being fully funded just through 911 surcharges. And that's what the point that I want to make sure that they get from us is that the cost of providing 911, it goes well beyond what we're collecting in 911 surcharge funds. Percent of costs covered by 911 funds. Again, if you can't get a budget for your PSAP, that's going to be a hard question to answer. If you can estimate it, great. If you can't, just state in that line that you can't. Total 911 revenues. This is total revenues collected by the governing body in the most recent calendar year. This includes everything that could be considered a 911 surcharge. So that's the local emergency telephone surcharge, the wireless prepaid 911 surcharge, and starting this year, it would also include disbursements from the state 911 surcharge. But since this is for the most recent year, obviously all you have is the emergency telephone charge and the wireless prepaid 911 charge. Total amount spent on NG 911, that's going to be a difficult one to answer. I'm just going to ask you to provide your best estimate. Sometimes it's not even clear necessarily whether a particular expenditure is, would you consider a new CAD system to be NG 911 because it's NG 911 capable? Unfortunately, I have no more guidance to give you other than the fact that the FCC asks us this question every year. So I'm asking you to just make your best judgment and provide us with your best estimate on that. Same thing with cybersecurity. The cost of cybersecurity for your PSAP might actually be rolled into an OIT budget or an IT budget for the city or county, or even the state if you're running one of the state's 3 PSAPs. So it can be a very difficult question to answer. Again, the reason I'm asking it is because this is a question that the FCC asks every year. So I'm making an attempt to gather this information. 911 fee diversion statement. The reason why we're asking this is because with the current grant program that we are currently distributing funds for migration of all of the 911 centers to the EZNet, we have to regularly assert to NTIA, which is managing the grant, and to the National 911 Program Office, which is also participating in management of that grant, that none of our subdivisions have diverted 911 fees for purposes that are not allowed in our statute. So this is a way of making of us gathering statements from every 911 authority in the state to say, no, to our knowledge, none of our 911 authorities are using 911 funds in ways that are not allowed in our statute. And we'll talk later about the 911 fee diversion notice of proposed rulemaking that recently came out from the FCC, because that has an effect on this as well. Population served. One of the things I'm trying to do with this is gather or create a baseline of how much it costs to provide 911 service in the state of Colorado per capita. And to do that, I need to know how much not only how much you're spending on 911, but how many people you're serving with those funds. And with that, I can create a baseline of what it costs to provide 911 service in the state per capita, which will help us to determine in the future if there are areas of the state that are underspending. I don't think anybody is overspending, but we want to make sure that if there's information that we can use to help make sure that everyone's receiving the funding they need to serve their population, that will help us to do that. And then this last question lets me know that you're done. And the reason why I put this in here is that I wanted you to be able to take multiple sessions if you needed to fill this out. So you click on that URL that I sent you, and you fill out a couple of the fields. And let's say there's a couple other fields that you need to do some research on before you answer. All you need to do is fill in those fields that you do have the answers for, leave this at no, and click submit. And that will save your information. Then you use the same URL later to reopen this, and all of the information you've already put in will still be there. But when you're done, I'll know that you're done because you've changed this from no to yes. And that's it. So it's a one-page survey. There's not too many questions in here. Some of the questions do require a little bit of research or working with your finance people to get the answers to them. So I recognize that they do take a little bit of work, and I appreciate the work that everybody's been doing to try to fill this out. And I did just send out a reminder, a 2-week reminder. I sent this out at the beginning of the month. I just sent out a 2-week reminder. I'm asking everyone to have them completed by the end of the month. If you don't get it completed by the end of the month, it's okay. I'll continue to work with you to try to get those answers filled in so that we can provide the most complete response to the FCC and the National 911 Program Office that we can. And I want to pause here to see if anybody has any questions about this data collection form.
I do, Daryl. This is Jeff.
Yes, Jeff.
So I've completed ours, but I had a few questions that came up. One was when we went to try and determine, the total amount expended by the ECCs. For GEFCOM, of course, it was very easy because they're standalone. For the other two, I went to their budgets that were filed for 2019 or 2020 and just used those numbers. Fortunately, there were line items in there for those budgets, and I assume that's okay to use that data.
If it's the best data you have, then that is perfectly okay to use that data.
Okay, and then for the number of positions, I'm assuming we're talking workstations, or what for us equates to the number of concurrent licenses. Is that a correct way of thinking about it, or did you have something else in mind?
Yeah, so we've got a couple different questions in here that are like that. One is total number of concurrent sessions. That's how many 911 lines you have. Total number of FTEs, PSAP FTEs. That's how many. That's not workstations necessarily. That's actual personnel. So how many full-time equivalents do you have?
But there's another one that talks about positions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that one, it does say workstations in the description underneath it. So that's what I'm talking about, is actual number. How many workstations is it capable of taking 911 calls?
Yeah. And so for us, all of our workstations are capable, even if they're a dispatch position, then therefore it equates to our concurrent licenses.
Correct. And that that's a question that I did get from at least one other PSAP while they were filling this out. So I will make that clearer in future editions of this data collection form, that it's any position that can take a 911 call, even if that position is usually used for another purpose, like dispatching or supervision or something along those lines.
And then for population served, for us, we just use the Google data or whatever population numbers the various entities have. I know for Kimberly, her population surges in times when the colleges are occupied or what have you. So do we need to try and make a guess as to what our transient population is, or just deal with the actual population served?
That is a good point. I haven't really thought that deeply about that. I would say probably just your permanent population, simply because transient population is really hard to predict or even have a firm number on after the fact. So I would just say your permanent population would be sufficient.
Great, then I'm done. I've got mine submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. When you do get to this, because most of you haven't filled it out yet, and like I said, that's fine. They're not due until the end of the month anyway. But when you do get to this, if you come up with any additional questions, please feel free to just contact me and ask. It's totally fine to ask questions. Okay. State 911 surcharge implementation. So a lot of you probably saw the email that I sent out to all of the 911 authority contacts this morning. And I went into quite a bit of detail in that. So if you weren't familiar with the state 911 surcharge, hopefully you are after reading that email. But essentially the fact that we're only now getting distributions from it was expected. So the carriers were required to start collecting the new state 911 surcharge from their customers in January. Then they were required to remit those to the PUC by the end of February. And now we have the final totals for February, and that is what is being used to distribute funds in the month of March. So it kind of runs 2 months behind the month in which the surcharges are actually collected. And for this first month's distribution is much lower than was originally predicted. Working with our vendor, Solix, which is the company that we contract with to actually do the collections from the carriers, it's very clear that there are a large number of carriers, even a majority of the carriers, that did not get the message that they're supposed to remit monthly. Previously, we have a TRS surcharge, a telecom relay service surcharge that the commission collects, that they were remitting quarterly. So to tell them now that they have to remit both the TRS and the 911 surcharge monthly was a change for them. And despite multiple notifications going out to the carriers, a lot of them, a majority of them, did not get the message. So I want everyone to know what you're seeing this month in the distributions is not going to be typical. It is going to be higher than that, because we have a list of all of the carriers that did not remit in February that had been remitting previously the TRS surcharge. So now we can follow up with those companies and get them to remit those back surcharges. We also have a 911 auditor position that we are in the process of hiring. And the statute that allows us to collect this state 911 surcharge also requires us to assess delinquent payment penalties of 15% plus interest for every month that they're delinquent. I believe that those measures put together with the 911 auditor applying those measures will bring a lot better compliance in the future. And I have a question from Vicky Nemec. Vicky?
Yeah, is this going to be an ACH deposit, direct deposit to our accounts, and who's it going to be made by?
Yes, it will be an ACH. It's coming from our vendor, which is called Solix, S-O-L-I-X. Their contract is up later this year, so that vendor may change depending on who wins the bid for when we get the RFP out for it. But that's who it should show up from.
Okay, will there be any companies taking money out by ACH for this? Like the Colorado, I got something from Colorado State 9 wanting over $1,200.
They wanted $1,200?
Yeah, they were trying to take away $1,200 from our account.
No, they will not be taking. They should not be taking any money out of your account. This is a deposit to you from the state 911 surcharge fund. If you have information about that, if you could like send me a screenshot or something of what you're seeing on your end, I'd appreciate that.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Any other questions? So as I said in the email, the surcharge rate was calculated with the idea of collecting as much money annually as all of the 911 authorities are spending annually on ESINet service from CenturyLink. And we're also distributing it based on number of concurrent sessions, which is how CenturyLink is charging for ESINet service. Ideally, what should happen is, if we calculate it correctly, you should be receiving an amount every month from the state 911 surcharge fund that is roughly equal to what you pay CenturyLink for the ESINet. And some of you aren't paying CenturyLink those charges yet for ESINet, but that doesn't matter. You'll get the same amount as if you were paying CenturyLink for the ESINet. We have noticed that there has been a drop in the number of lines total statewide in the latter half of 2020. That's probably not surprising, with a lot of businesses closing, or at least temporarily closing, or closing offices and working from home. So maybe they don't keep their phone lines operating while they're working from home. And there's also an economic recession on as well. So we may not collect quite as much as we had hoped, but we will collect a lot closer to that goal amount than what this month's distribution is showing, because over half of the telecom companies didn't remit when they were supposed to. Applications to increase concurrent sessions. So one of the things that the new statute does is, because we're distributing those state 911 surcharge funds based on number of concurrent sessions, we had to have some way for 911 authorities to say, hey, we want more concurrent sessions for the purposes of our reimbursement. Because there's really no reason why you can't order as many concurrent sessions as you want from CenturyLink. The only drawback to that is you would have to pay for it. But if you're then getting reimbursed for it, then there's not really a disincentive to get more concurrent sessions than you need from CenturyLink. So the way this is going to work is there's going to be an application form that's very similar to the application form we use now for when a 911 authority wants to apply for a surcharge, a local emergency telephone charge increase above the threshold. That form cannot be made live or distributed, unfortunately, until after our current rulemaking is complete. So we've got a rulemaking out there right now that sets the standard for what kinds of questions and what kinds of information we collect when we're asking for applications to increase the number of concurrent sessions. In the meantime, because we do have another rate setting this year, when the commission does that rate setting, I will be working with CenturyLink to determine how many concurrent sessions are currently in use in all of the 911 authorities in the state, and I'll be confirming those numbers with you. So be watching for that when I send that out and say, this is what CenturyLink shows as the number of concurrent sessions you're currently paying for. Is this correct? And that is what we will base the percentages on for 2022 for the 911 surcharge distribution. But there will be a form eventually, as soon as Commission Council tells me that it's okay for us to make that form live. It will be a much simpler form than the emergency telephone charge increase form. But I do want to get some feedback from you guys on that as well. So when we get that available, I'll be sending it out and asking for if people have any thoughts on the form and any suggestions for improvement. Just to give you an idea of some of the things we're going to be asking for, peak call volume statistics, either from Clearview or from your own information management system, and then really just a narrative. Why do you want more concurrent sessions? And it may be that your own MIS or Clearview is showing that you're using all of your concurrent sessions during your peak busy hour, and therefore you need more. That would be one reason. If you want some for another reason, for redundancy purposes or something like that, you would just have to explain that in the application. They would have to be filed by June 1st. That's what our draft rules say anyway, is that they have to be filed by June 1st in order for the commission to consider them in their rulemaking, which has to be completed by October 1st. And that date is set in statute, so we have no ability to change that. The commission has to set those percentages for the following year by October 1st. So in order for the commission to make sure that the commission has all of the information it needs, we set a date of June 1st as the deadline for getting us your request to increase your number of concurrent sessions. Next topic is 911 auditing. So another change in the statute this year is that the PUC is now authorized to audit telecommunications providers to ensure that they are properly collecting and remitting 911 surcharge funds, as well as local emergency telephone charges. The local 911 authorities have always had the authority to audit providers if they wanted to at their own expense. And you will continue to have that ability to audit the providers as it relates to emergency telephone charges. The commission has the authority to audit carriers regarding emergency telephone charges and the new state 911 surcharge. And as I said, we're in the process of hiring a position to fulfill that role full time. If you know anybody, please let them know. I can send out the link for the job opening. I did get confirmation today that you do not have to move to the Denver metro area. If you live somewhere else in Colorado, you can do this. You do have to be a Colorado resident, but you do not have to move to Denver to take this job. So if you know somebody who would be a good fit for that, please let me know, and we can get them a copy or a link to the job application form. Governing bodies normally would do audits at their own expense, and you can still do them at your own expense. But another provision that was put in the statute is that a governing body doing their own audit can petition the commission to pay for the costs of their audit. Now, the costs of that audit come out of the commission's administrative retention fund. We get to keep up to 4% of all of the funds that are collected from the state 911 surcharge. And that pays for not only the 911 auditor position that we're hiring, but our bills to our vendor who is collecting the 911 surcharge for us come out of that 4%. And additionally, if we pay for any outside audits, those would also come out of that 4%. So the ability of the commission to fund every petition that might come in is limited. But that is something that you can do. It would be filed as a standard petition with the commission. If you don't know what those look like, I would encourage you to engage with your city or county attorney or to hire an attorney to look at that and help you fill out a petition or create a petition to the commission for that purpose. And then the rules for how the commission will evaluate those petitions are in those proposed rules that are currently in circulation right now, and that we will be having a hearing on in April. I think that's all I had on that. Does anybody have any questions about 911 auditing and what the commission is going to be doing with those in the future? One thing I did want to point out that's not on here necessarily is that the new rule or the new statute requires that for a local 911 governing body to commit an audit, to perform an audit of a telecommunications provider, it has to have audit rules of its own that are codified either in city or county ordinance or in a resolution passed by the authority board, depending on what kind of authority board you have. That has to include also an appeals process. So you're not allowed to necessarily do an audit just however you want to do an audit. You have to have rules in place for yourself for how those audits will be performed. And one of the things I see this 911 auditor position doing once we hire them is working with the Prepaid and Collections Committee of the 911 Advisory Task Force and helping to develop some standard template rules that 911 authorities can adopt if they wish to for how they would perform audits of a telecommunications provider. And that will help create more consistency across the state, but it will also help those smaller 911 authorities that have never done audits before get some rules in place so that if they wish to do an audit, they can. So be watching for that as well. I'm going to be working with Jackie Louise, who is the chair of the Prepaid and Collections Committee, and this new person that we're going to be hiring will be involved in that process as well. Emergency telephone charge applications did change as well. I think most of you have gotten the message already that it's no longer 70 cents. It used to be that if you wanted a local emergency telephone charge in excess of 70 cents, you had to file an application with the commission. That threshold is now set annually by the commission. Last year, they set that threshold at $1.72 that went into effect as of January. And this October 1st, the commission will be setting a new threshold that will go into effect on January 1st of 2022. So it's going to change every year, and it's going to be adjusted for inflation as well as the needs of the 911 governing bodies. So right now it's $1.72. You can increase your surcharge up to $1.72 without filing an application with the PUC. However, there is a big wrinkle in this that everyone was not aware of that you should be, is that now effective dates for emergency telephone charge increases can only take place on either February 1st or June 1st. That's a strange date. Those are strange dates. You would think it would be February 1st and August 1st to make them 6 months apart, but this was the compromise that the bill drafters came up with the telecommunications carriers, who were concerned that there might be a mass influx of increases at different times of the year. So they wanted to limit it to 2 times a year, and February 1st and June 1st were the dates that they agreed on. There is also a 60-day notice requirement to the telecom providers. So if you change your emergency telephone charge, you have to give the carriers 60 days notice prior to the effective date of that charge taking effect. What that means in practice is that if you want to increase your surcharge by June 1st, you need to have notice to all of the carriers by April 2nd. That's 60 days before June 1st. If you do not get notice to the carriers by April 2nd, you're going to have to wait until an effective date of February 1st of 2022, and that's a long time to wait. So if you do need to increase your surcharge, you don't necessarily need to file an application. If it's $1.72 or less, you don't have to file an application with the PUC, but you do have to get notice to the carriers by April 2nd at the latest. Earlier is even better, but April 2nd at the latest to meet that 60-day requirement. Now, if you do have to file an application with the commission because what you're requesting is above $1.72, then unfortunately it's already too late for June 1st, because there's a 30-day comment period that's involved with any application to the Public Utilities Commission. So if you were to file an application with the commission for a June 1st effective date, you have to factor in not only the 60-day notice requirement, but you have to factor in an additional 30 days public notice requirement for the application, which makes it 90 days, which means that you would have had to have your application in by March. I can't remember the exact day that would have been 90 days, but I think it's like March 2nd or 3rd. So unfortunately, it's too late for June 1st, but I do want people to be aware of this because this is going to be the case going forward. So for February 1st of 2022, if you need a surcharge increase for February 1st of 2022, you need to get your notice out roughly December 1st. I'm doing math in my head. Yes, December 1st is when you would have to have the notice to the carriers. And if that surcharge increase would require an application to the commission, you have to have that application to the commission by November 1st, roughly. So count 90 days backwards from the effective date, and that's when you would have to have the application into the commission. And one caveat with that, if you turn it in exactly 30 days before the notice to the providers is required, there's no guaranteeing that we can process your application within that 30 days. Things sometimes happen that cause an application to take longer than that to process and to approve by the commission. So you're really better off, the earlier you can get it in, the better. If you send me an application right now for an increase to go into effect by February 1st, I would accept it and process it and take it to the commission for consideration. So there's not really such a thing as sending it to me too early. But if you send it to me after November 1st, it would be too late. Any questions about that timing? Okay. And this is just me talking ahead of my own slides. This is information that we just talked about. There is no guarantee that an application will be approved within 30 days. So sooner is better if you need to file an application to increase your emergency telephone charge over the current threshold. One thing I get questions about a lot is, you know, when a 911 authority increases their emergency telephone charge and they need to send notice to all, that 60-day notice that I talked about to all of the carriers, they ask, where do I send it to? In the past, I've just said, you know, look at every company that's given you a remittance over the last couple of years and send a notice to them. That's still not bad advice, I don't think. But in addition to that, if you want to make sure that you're getting all of them, we do have a list that's now on the 911 program webpage of every company that is registered to do business in Colorado as a telecommunications provider. I'm going to open up that page right now so you can see how to get to it. And I'm also going to put this link in the chat. It doesn't have a nice, clean URL, but if you bookmark this, you'll be able to get back to it. So the Colorado 911 program webpage looks like this. I've got a few links on the front page. All of these buttons go to different pages. These are external links that you should be aware of. There is a link to the 911 Advisory Task Force. If you're not participating in that and would like to in the future, that's a good way to get to it. But right under here where it says program areas, the second button says 911 fees. If you click that, then you have information about the different 911 fees in Colorado. There's the state 911 surcharge. There's the emergency telephone charge, which is the one that is remitted directly to you from the telecommunications carriers. And there's a lot of information about that because they differ across the state. And then down here at the bottom of that section, the emergency telephone charge section, at the bottom of that section, there's a box that says originating service providers registered to provide service in Colorado. And right there is a link. I'm going to keep this updated every month. I'll update a refreshed copy of this Excel spreadsheet. And in this Excel spreadsheet is contact information. And that is way too tiny even for me to read, so I know it is for you. I'm going to zoom in here. And so we've got company IDs, we've got company names, we've got addresses. So if you want to send it to them by snail mail, you can do that. And we have email addresses for each of them as well. One thing that did change in the statute, previously the 911 governing bodies were required to send the notice by registered mail. That is no longer required. It no longer says how it needs to be sent at all. So you can send a postal letter if you want, or since you have email addresses for all of these companies from this spreadsheet, you can send it to them by email. I do recommend that you have read receipts turned on and that you save that information, that you send it to them so that later if they say, well, you never notified us, you've got proof that yes, you did notify them, and you can go back to that and show them. Any questions on emergency telephone charge increases? Okay. Now, the FCC recently issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. This has been a topic at the 911 Advisory Task Force as well as the Legislative Committee of the 911 Advisory Task Force. The FCC is currently taking comments on proposed rules that would establish what the FCC considers to be acceptable uses of 911 surcharge funds. The FCC was already talking about this topic. They had a notice of inquiry back in November. And then in December, Congress passed a very large bill. It was over 5,000 pages long. This is the bill that included the $600 stimulus payment that came out last year and that most people got in January. And in that bill, the Congress actually required the FCC to go through this process. They required the FCC to do a rulemaking within 180 days, establishing what acceptable uses of 911 surcharge funds are. And they're also setting up a strike force, their words, not mine, to make recommendations on what penalties and other actions should be taken to discourage states from using funds in ways that are contrary to the FCC's definition of acceptable uses. The draft rules that the FCC put out are somewhat vague. They do state that operational costs for public safety answering points would be considered acceptable, and that was a fairly broad category. I think some areas that are not so clear as to whether they would be considered acceptable or not are things such as emergency notification service, which is an allowable expense under Colorado statute, but under the draft rules that the FCC put out, they're not mentioned either way. So we don't know if those would be considered acceptable or not. Another question that I've gotten is administrative costs for 911 governing bodies. That's not mentioned in the draft rules. It does mention that administrative costs for the PSAP are allowed, but since a number of 911 authorities in Colorado have an executive director at the 911 authority level or other personnel, or they perform other services at the 911 authority level, we need some clarification from the FCC as to whether those types of expenses are allowed. Additionally, the draft rules don't mention administrative expenses at the state level either. So the 4% administrative retention that the PUC gets to keep to cover our costs for auditing telecommunications carriers, it's not clear from the FCC's draft rules whether those would be allowed. So the PUC did file comments with the FCC on this matter, encouraging them to add clarity to their draft rules. I do want to tell everyone, this is a process where the FCC gets comments from 911 stakeholders across the country. We're not the only state that has these questions, especially those regarding administrative costs of running 911 programs as to whether those are acceptable uses of 911 surcharge funds. So I do expect that the FCC will give us an answer on that. And the thing I wanted to stress here is that you do not need to change your spending activity at this time. It's not clear where the FCC is going to land on the topic of acceptable uses of 911 surcharge funds. And even if they do choose a definition of acceptable uses of 911 surcharge funds that is more restrictive than Colorado's statute, Colorado's statute still applies. You are not required to do anything more restrictive than Colorado's statute requires. Whether Colorado then wishes to change its statute to match the FCC's required rules or permanent rules will be up to the state legislature. But until that time, until the state statute actually changes regarding use of 911 surcharge funds, I'm advising everyone to not try to rearrange their entire budgets to meet those standards, because right now they're a moving target. And before I go on, does anybody have any questions about the FCC's NPRM? The deadline for comments on that, I do want to mention, is March 23rd, so time is short, but you can file comments still in that proceeding. And then after that, there's a 10-day reply comment period during which time you can reply to other people's comments by filing more comments with the FCC. If this is something that you are worried about at your local 911 authority level, I highly encourage you to file comments. You do not have to be an attorney to file comments with the FCC. Any citizen can file them. The filing process is actually very easy. So I would encourage you to do that. I'm not discouraging anyone from using an attorney, because I do think you get better formatted in the correct format and get better quality comments to the FCC. But anybody can file comments with the FCC. You don't have to be an attorney. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. And with that, that's all of the topics I wanted to talk about today, but I am happy to talk about any other issue that you want. So I'll just open it up if anybody has a question for me or comment. Well, I will take silence to mean that I answered all of your questions.
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. It was very interesting.
Great.
Hey, Daryl, one question, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
In the past, annually, you've asked for stats regarding, the number of lines and different categories that we collect for. And I'm curious as to, are you going to do that again this year? What format will it be, and when will you need that?
No, the form that I sent out is the only form that I'm doing. So you don't have to worry about any additional data requests. If it turns out I didn't ask a question that I need the answer for, we'll just tell the FCC that we can't answer that question this year, and then next year I'll update the form to include those questions.
Very good, thank you.
And Carrie asked what the name is that'll show up from the electronic fund transfer, and I had that earlier. Let me see if I can find it.
I think you said Solix, S-O-L-I-X.
That's the name of the company that we use to collect it. I don't know if that actually shows up on your ACH statement.
Ours came in as that Colorado State, blah, 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 whatever it was. I haven't seen the full thing yet.
Yeah, so it said Colorado State 9. I assume that was 911, but because there's a dash in there, it took the rest of it out. So it just says Colorado State 9 Trade Pay ACH. And it's a weird way to show it, but like I've noticed that electronic fund transfers, sometimes it's a matter of hieroglyphics to determine what they actually mean. But that's what it showed up for Garfield County, who was the first person to contact me about the amount they received.
So Daryl, to clarify, that'll be the name that comes in for the new supplemental statewide 911 surcharge.
Yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Do you guys think this was useful? If so, do you think this would be useful to do again in the future, maybe quarterly or twice a year? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Very useful. I think it's always good to touch base and reiterate.
I agree.
I concur.
I like this.
Great.
I agree.
I think quarterly would probably be good, at least to start with, because in 3 months I'll have a much better idea of how the State 911 Surcharge Fund is performing and whether it's raising the revenue at the levels that we expected. So I think I'll plan another one for 3 months from now, so that'll be in the June timeframe. All right, well, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. And if anybody comes up with any additional questions, or if there's ever anything I can help you with, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much, Daryl.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you, Daryl.